I'm Sue MacLennan. I'm a choreographer, dancer, teacher, artist, and I joined Chisenhale as part of the original collective that when X6 was forced to leave the building in Butler's Wharf, the X6 collective, as far as which I wasn't a part of, found through the other artists that were around in the building were invited to join this building, which became Chisenhale Dance Space. And I can't actually. I used to go to X6 and I used to join in workshops there and did some performing there, but not a lot. I wasn't very central to that, but I was invited by Jackie Lansley and Fergus Early to join to be in I Giselle, which was a radical feminist remake of the ballet Giselle. Is how it used to get introduced, and that was sort of spanned a bit, and I can't actually remember the order of events there, whether I was invited to join the collective and out of the collective. But I have a feeling that myself and Chris Cheek and Susie Gilmore, who were the other people in the piece alongside Jackie and Fergus, I've got a feeling we had started that, and that's partly maybe why. You'd have to ask the X6 members because I wasn't part of that, whether that was why we got invited to join the original collective, which was exciting and interesting, and I hadn't been a part of. It's funny, I always felt like I sort of straddled different parts of the dance world that existed at that time because I worked for Rosemary Butcher, danced worked with Rosemary Butcher and danced in her company, and she was based at Riverside Studios in Hammersmith, which was totally the opposite side of London from X6. And I used to teach classes at Riverside in the evenings as part of that that kind of residency or alliance. But I used to go to things in different parts. I wasn't part of any group, so it was quite interesting to then become part of the collective of Chisenhale, which was a very diverse. I mean, IGL was a very diverse group of people, and the collective was even more.
Yeah, and what do you think drew you to Chisenhale and being part of that collective?
I think it's just that it was an interesting invitation. You know, I'd been to X6. I thought X6 was my perception of X6 was it had this very positive. I'm not seeing what I want in the world, so I'm going to make what I want happen but not just from a selfish point of view. I'm going to make it happen so I can have what I want in the world, but also more people can share that. And it had, so I saw Chisenhale as an extension, you know, the invitation to join. And we didn't at that point, I don't think we really knew, apart from they wanted to take the things that they'd created and started at X6 and continue that. But they wanted to, you know, in the same way as I'm just saying, it's not just what I want to see in the world, but what we want to offer in the world. And they wanted that to expand, so they invited lots of different sorts of people who might be interested to go on that journey, really. So I think that's what attracted me, to be part of something that made things happen that were interesting, you know. And I did find, you know, you come out of training and you think, well, actually it wasn't really like that for me, but you often think like you have to do class all the time, or you have to go. And there were some really interesting classes, or more one-off workshops and things. People would come to London and do something, but in general that impetus that I wanted wasn't really happening for me either. I remember a moment when I thought, no, actually, I'd rather do my own class on myself or just do some practice, as we would call it now, but we wouldn't say, have said that then. Do my further my own practice than go to a class that's not satisfying me. I mean, there were some. I remember a period going to Richard Alston's classes actually in the drill hall. That was really a strong time for me. But yeah, so it was, it's part of that thing of, rather than saying, oh, well, this is the class it's on, so I better go to that one and that will be good, going, no, let's find a space. That can be a space to rehearse, that can be a space for performance, it can be a space for classes and different kinds of classes. And
and as part of that collective, that initial group, what was it that you were doing at Chisenhale? And also, what were you getting up to in terms of your own personal practice and work?
It's in terms of being part of the collective and what did we do, the only word that comes into my mind is everything. At the beginning, I mean, some people did more of some bits of it than others, depending on their interest and their skills. So I wasn't involved in putting the floor down, but everybody did some kind of practical building work, as far as I remember. That was kind of that was right at the beginning. There was some kind of I'm struggling not to say the word rule, but it wasn't just a Chisenhale. It was because we belonged to Art Place Trust, which was the larger building, and they already, because they were trying to bring the building up to a better state for use, everybody that was part of Art Place Trust had to do a certain amount of, repairing windows or rubbing things down or scraping. Or
sort of commitment to the building itself.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just sorting the painting and sorting. I just remember doing a lot, because they've got so many small windows. There was so much work to be done on the windows. So just some needed preparing for being glazed again, or just painting or rubbing down. And I remember doing a lot of that. Just we're setting things up. And I mean, I do remember a moment when I thought, oh, this is quite fun, when you kind of had an idea about somebody you wanted to come and perform, and you'd walk to a meeting, and everybody thought it was an okay idea. And I do remember, I can't remember who it was, sadly, but I do remember that there was a moment when I thought, I've done everything apart from perform, apart from make and perform this work. I had the idea, I got in touch with them, I organised when they would come down. I came in and teched it myself. I don't think I could have teched it and taken the tickets, but I must probably set up. Did quite a bit of front of house. The tech person was also front of house, and saw the people into their seats, climbed up the ladder, did that.
Yeah.
And shared out the payment and whatever we did. Did the poster. There were times when you just. So you kind of, we just, as a collective, right at the beginning, we were involved in whatever we were interested in, really, and discussing how things might go further. And I did rehearse there to varying degrees at different times. Warm and cold. I can remember rehearsing with Mary Prestige when it was very, 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 very cold, and we just had those Calagas heaters. We had 2 Calagas heaters, and underneath the floor was this big empty cold space. So, and we just sat by a Calagas fire talking about what we would do and not actually moving. And I said, right, I've stopped moving now. And you could see your breath. It doesn't seem to get that cold. I don't even remember. Well, maybe we're just more heated in general now everywhere. But it was just, you know, that where you could see your breath coming out. And I can't remember whether that's linked, but or whether we were just indecisive. But I remember we were trying to decide costumes as well, and we had piles of clothes that we'd brought in to try and decide, and we ended up wearing uh, about 6 layers of clothes, and then taking them off as we got warm. And I don't know where that came from, the cold, or just us not being able to decide which costume, or liking the thing of having too many. I don't know.
So you used the space for yourself as a rehearsal space, and you know, space for collaborations, and you had your dance company as well in the 80s. Was that?
Yeah. Yes, I had my own company. Yeah, I'm just trying to remember where I started more rehearsal there. In '84, I did a solo called Gravity is Proving Most Difficult. Um, I certainly rehearsed that a lot at Chisenhale, along with another in '85. I did a piece called A.N. Other Solo, which was improvised with music by Chris Cheek and Phil Jack, and a piece with a large group piece called Twister. Yeah, it is. I did a lot of work there, it's true, at that period. Um, and Gravity is Proving Most Difficult, we made at the same time as some awful Chancellor of the Exchequer had put VAT on building work. We were all sort of sorted out, and with because when we first went there, there was a fire escape in the top right-hand corner from the audience point of view. But it wasn't strong enough and it didn't lead anywhere good. And we had to get this new one. And we were all set up to do it, and then they put VAT, so it meant we had another 15%, which was several £1,000 to. Anyway, they came to do an interview about we were trying to raise extra money, and it was when I was rehearsing Gravity, so there was they watched some of Gravity, and I can't remember, there was some kind of mix they used. Oh, this is what's happening. But
Interesting, yeah, because there's a whole box in the archive dedicated to the fire escape.
it was quite a blow because we worked so hard to get. I wasn't very involved in fundraising. When I say everything, I don't think I did much with that side of fund applications and fundraising and things in that early days. I was much more on the practical side of curating, really, I suppose, and the practical side of hanging lights and those one class, or was it two, that I had when I was a student at Dartington about, you hang the lights this way up, never do this with them. This is the principle, point that one that way and one that way. Came in very handy.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have. I mean, there were some people for sure that knew more about those things than others, but just having a bit of knowledge always helped. Yeah, I remember the fire escape was just, I think we just got so far and we're just about to do everything, and that just, because you have to have a fire escape to kind of publicise more broadly. We had started, I think, to do things, but because we did. I mean, people must have talked in other conversations about the first performance. On my memory of the first performance with Philip Jack and Doug Gill doing their version of Two Pigeons, because that was definitely the fire escape was still happening. We didn't have the fire escape. I thought it was a wonderful piece. They did. They did. They had caught some pigeons, 6 pigeons, I think, in which they had in a tea chest. But apparently they're quite calm in the dark. They just, it's not as cruel as it sounds. And the theory was that it was just on stage, I think, and they thought when they lifted they would turn all the lights off and lift the box, and they would automatically go out the door, but they didn't. So this whole special introductory first celebratory night finished with people going, "Oh my God!" But they were fine, and they they were coaxed out of.
Yeah.
They were fine. No pigeons were hurt. But it wasn't just that. Actually, it was a brilliant piece where one of them put a plaster of Paris cast on their leg, and the other one put some gaffer tape across their eyes, and they did a contact improvisation duet, or a spoof contact improvisation duet with this broken leg. And they were just very funny. They're both very funny people, and it was very celebratory, really. And the pictures was just like this reference to this tradition, and it just went a bit awry. So I know there were performances, and the classic is the Charlie Hooker. There was a Charlie Hooker performance. I can't remember whether it was called Horizon or something like that, but it had these lanes that continued up the wall, which is why the wall has got these crisscross lines on it. It was a pretty faint now, I think. There's Charlie Hooker's a musician, performance artist. That might have been the same night, but it was one of the first performances for sure. And where we had blocks of wood, and you would walk and then hit every 4 steps you'd hit or something like that. They were all different patterns, and the thing that we hit was a piece of wood with a contact thing. So when you hit it, it would make a contact, make electric. And we had I don't know, something very plain on, but with little light. So when you hit it, it lit up. And it was a whole score, and we went up, and it was like a runway, but the runway carried on up the wall in a way, and it had lights stuck on along the wall. So at some point, as the piece progressed, I think it went dark, or it went darker and darker. So you could see these lines of runway, but the only drawback was it left lines on the wall, crisscross pattern on the wall. But if you'd been there and you were part of it, and I loved that piece, it was very me as well, because I like pattern and rhythm and phasing rhythmic cycles and things like that. So it was always good memories to see that for me. I mean, I was thinking when we were talking about the fire escape, I mean, that was a moment when I was teaching workshops at Chisenhale, and I didn't have any money. I didn't have any Arts Council money. I probably just failed to get something, and I thought I was really enjoying the people that because I was doing improvisation or choreographic stroke improvisation workshops. And people I just really enjoy watching what was happening in the room, and I thought, and I really like what I'm seeing in front of me. So I invited people, and there were some very experienced dancers, maybe a bit like Rosemary Lee's, much grander structures. But I would there were maybe 5 or 6 professional dancers, and then variety of experience, really. Everybody went to workshops and things, so we built a piece called Twister, on a short story by it's just something I read, and it had these images in that triggered stuff. And I was working quite a bit with a composer musician called Jane Wells at the time, and she made music for it, and she invited 6 or 7 saxophonists. She was learning, or she'd taken up saxophone. She was already, but it was relatively early in her saxophone, and she met all these other people, and so we had all these saxophonists, from bass saxophone to soprano and in between. And one of the images in this short story was of a train. It was actually it's a twister, so it's about a tornado, but the sound, one of the images was like a train hurtling. And so there was this point when all the musicians had gone out of the space, and they used to go down the stairs and round and up the fire escape. So they came in the fire escape jogging, and they all jogged in a group playing one note. So the note, it made a chord, and but it went
Yeah.
on this chord. And then when we performed it, there were people. So this is a good use of the fire escape. We needed a fire escape to do, and but there were kids from the flats or around throwing stones at them as they were. I didn't discover this, of course, until after the whole thing.
Yeah.
They were like, "Oh, we weren't sure." Remember to leave the fire escape open so they could get in as well.
Yeah.
That was a big fear if you've forgotten that. And there were very diverse people in that work. I really liked doing that. Everybody knew the setup, that we knew there was no money to do anything, and did they want to be part of it? And then we ended up performing it at Riverside, my split thing. Simone Forti had been doing a workshop there, and I think she had her whole performance that she'd come over to do, but she wanted to share the work they'd been doing in the workshop. So like an hour after her show or something like that, they put on hers, and they said we could do ours as well next to it.
What you mentioned that you're doing some work at Riverside as well, and obviously you're at Chisenhale and probably other places too. If you were touring, I don't know, but what was it like to be an independent dance artist during that period, and what sort of, what was the role of Chisenhale in that scene for you?
That's a tricky question. Not quite sure why it is, but maybe it's just its breadth. It was very positive, I think, to be independent, as well as difficult. I had varied success with funding, and I think being part of Chisenhale, just having a home to rehearse and was important in those sort of times.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't, I didn't always rehearse there, but did a lot. I did a lot of rehearsing there, for sure. And sometimes we performed work there, which was then toured to the place that was performed in place as well. But I really liked performing or toured around that kind of size venue. But I liked performing it at Chisenhale. I often thought that I'd like to see some things like Richard Alston work, actually, why he's featuring today, or Siobhan Davies' work, or in that space, because something about the proximity and I don't know, there's something different about seeing that work in those spaces, and as opposed to the bigger than I went, to going to Sadler's Wells or somewhere where sometimes it all gets a bit polished and you can't see the people through the surface. Well, as I think that's the thing, you can see the work, but you can really feel the people.
The intimacy or something of the space.
But it's sort of big enough to do quite patterny, swirling, that kind of work. But in terms of, I was just thinking, sorry, just doubling back slightly. Just before we started talking, I was thinking about the breadth of people, not only people from a dance background that were part of Chisenhale, and Phil and Doug were two people that came from not dance, purely dance focused. But it made me think about Mona Hartoum, who was part of, and Maurice Aegis, who were, I don't know if Mona was part of Arts Place Trust, but Maurice was, and in fact he had his studio where Studio 23 became, and then he moved into another one further into the Arts Place Trust, because his daughter is Gabby Aegis, and so he always had this link into dance, and we used to dance in he built some inflatable sculptures for us to dance in. And he wasn't part of the collective, but I don't know, when I start thinking about early days of Chisenhale, I think about him. and Mona Hartoon was part of the collective for a while, and I can remember her making a piece which may have started right down at the bottom of the building, whether it was actually underneath Chisenhale or whether it was where the gallery now is. I'm not sure, but I can remember kind of a derelict sort of space and little toy soldiers and little pools of water and things. And because she came from a place of war, and going up and things that happen on the roof. I think later we weren't allowed to go in some places that we did go. People took us early on because once we got more official, you had to be more careful about. But it was really interesting to be around. Not only her, but all the people on the collective were interesting in their own way, and they came from different backgrounds and brought different perspectives.
Yeah.
I can't even remember everybody that was on it now because it's. I was thinking about on a bit from there that some important things were these regular platforms. I mean, it seems that it's such a common thing now to have a platform of kind of mixed people showing work, and we used to do these nights called Cha Cha Cha. And it was, I mean, it did happen in some other places, but I think it was somewhere in Putney that used to do similar, but not as often maybe. And, it was resolution and all those kind of platforms. And in fact, I remember discussions when we stopped doing it that there were so many other, we'd done our job, we'd got the idea, and there were lots of other places doing it, and maybe we didn't need, because it was a lot of work. It had this sort of cabaret feel to it as well, and it was fun Friday night. I mean, there was like Trip the like Fantastic Toe, the night that preceded Trip Space. That was a bigger version of that because they found different spaces once a month on a Friday, and they did this Trip the like Fantastic Toe, it was called, which was very much a fun Friday evening, but it was also quite experimental art, dance happening, and music, and just now was quite like Cha 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 was quite like that, and around that time, it was when it got to the point when people were saying, "Was John Ashford there?" It's like it was more important who was there and watched it than doing it. Like, oh, but it's inevitable. I didn't blame people for saying that because they were just trying to make work and get more opportunities to make and show work, but
Yeah.
the system can fall on top of you sometimes. I remember a time when I think Chris Cheek might have organised it, but he was certainly quite involved, where at the beginning of breakdance, there was some early breakdance from the locality, because that was a whole other thing at Chisenhale, was trying to having moved from X6 to a very different residential environment, that we did try and were successful in different ways, but it was quite hard to try and not just impose ourselves on the locality. But so I think it was quite local, probably all male, I think. I can't really remember, that were just, it was just coming from New York, was doing this thing. And somehow we had this night that was like contact improvisation. Well, this is what we do. This is like just a wacky kind of meet and share sort of night. I think that I was just trying to put my brain back through the years and years and years of Chisenhale, and and that was one that jumped out at me as kind of, it didn't it wasn't enormous. It didn't lead to a great collaboration where we made this piece and did that, but it was just quite low key, but really nice to just spend time with people who wouldn't normally come through the door and wouldn't know who we were, but they were kind of curious about what we did, and we were very curious and wanted to understand and learn bits of what they did. And then it gradually got more organised as I think about Chisenhale, not it wasn't organised, but it wasn't us, the collective, doing everything. And the moment when we actually had a bit more money, trying to get the local council to fund us as well, and things like that. I mean, then we did have an office, and I can actually remember this moment when, because we did do everything, we used to have the wall that holds the performance space used to be made of electric blankets. Do you know that? I mean, when we didn't have a wall, but we had to separate it. I don't know whose idea or who made them, but I don't think it was totally, but it was like old electric blankets sewn together that used to, you didn't plug them in, it wasn't a warmth thing. But so there was so you always had, so somewhere in that transition, I think we did have a wall by then. I remember doing front of house and saying, could you take your seats, please? And some people picked up a chair because they were so sort of. I went, oh no, I didn't mean take your seats. I just meant come in. But you know, people were ready to kind of go, okay, I take my seat in here and I sit there. I think the seating was quite a big moment as well, and a changing room, which was, a kind of messy archive room, and having an office, and it was quite exciting when those sort of which had structures.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can shut the door and sit down. Yeah, and the people, so Amanda Leon was very um, important in that development, for sure. And having people, people whose job was to, I mean, they supported the collective and were part of the collective, but they also, that inputted once we started to get people actually working for the organisation, and working with the organisation, and actually doing that, instead of doing that as well as everything else that you did. And we still inputted.
Maybe if you had to describe what Chisenhale was at that period of time, how would you describe it?
It was a building with a studio, and then two studios, a small and a big studio. It was a space where a space that supported the growth of dance. So it supported people rehearsing and having space, but having workshops, having ideas about who they'd like to have workshops with, and possibility of setting things like that up, such as Joan Skinner came and did Skinner releasing technique. It gave enough size that you could, an organisation that you could say, we really want to do this, let's make it happen, and loads of other people, brilliant people, came. And it gave a space, but it didn't say, it wasn't fixed in what that had to be, in what the performance or the workshops or needed to be. It was quite broad, but so it gave the space that you could say, well, could we do this, or could this happen, or this sort of thing, or that sort of thing. I think it was. We didn't talk about mission statements in those days, did we? But we must have had some kind of statement like that. But I would have. My understanding was that it was about furthering new dance, new directions, in dance and art and collaboration, but not in any way fixing what that should be, but just trying to be open and supportive of. I'm making it all sound very idealistic and grand, but it was, we didn't always agree on all of those things. A collective life was quite tricky sometimes, but I think really important that it was, we did have these rambling meetings and disagreements or agreements, but I think that was part of it as well. That was quite important, especially really. But yeah, that's what I would say it was. It was the actual, it was important that it was a building.
Yeah.
So you could have something that worked through several different moving spaces, pop-up sort of thing
Mm.
also have been important, but it was a space. Um, Endless discussions about what to call it. That's really sticks
Mm.
as well when I just hear the name. Because we had so many kind of wild, or my favourite was something like the Palace or something. That would have got mixed up with the place, of course. But the Doris's Dance Palace. I don't know. We had all these sort of different. Let's go. You could say, let's go to Doris's tonight. You know, we were trying to find kind of a memorable but fun name for it, and that we just couldn't agree. We kept getting nearer, and then no, somebody no, and we had to just come back to where it was,
Yeah.
and go, okay, it's Chisenhale, and it's just Chisenhale Dance Space, and yeah, painting. God, just after those stairs, yes, that was another job, painting the line going up. Yeah, um,
Amazing. I didn't know about all the different names. That's so funny. But I guess, yeah, because
or other people will remember it differently, but
yeah. But it's interesting because, you know, Chisenhale Dance Space makes it sound quite, not formal, but, you know, that it is a dance space. But then, like you were saying, it was unfixed in terms of what it could be. But then it also makes sense, you know, it's very hard to name something, isn't it? And just like X6 was X6 because it was
yeah,
X6 warehouse in Butler's Wharf. Um,
it's very difficult naming. I didn't
yeah,
realise.
but it works. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, really? Um, yeah. Well, great. Thank you very much for talking to me and sharing that. Really
Welcome.
good to hear.